I spent the past weekend diving deep into the story of now Saint Carlo Acutis, and honestly, I was not prepared for what I found. Okay, I've long known about the canonization process, how it sort of works and everything, but I've never really studied a saint this closely from start to finish, like his life, his death, and the miracles that were tied to him. Okay, and what I discovered in this case literally nearly brought me to tears. Okay, especially when I read how he responded to his suffering in his final hours. It's just a remarkable story. And you know, saints can sometimes feel distant from us. Like, okay, when I think of someone like Saint Maximilian Kolbe, I admire him so deeply, but he feels almost like worlds away from me. Okay, the guy was literally a martyr in a concentration camp. Carlo, though, is different, right? He's right here in front of us. He's a millennial kid who loves video games and he loved coding. He wore sneakers and a hoodie, but he also lived with a kind of holiness that puts us face to face with what you and I are called to be. He's not up on some unreachable pedestal. He's beckoning us to become holy too. So here's what you can expect from this video and this video, what we're going to cover. This one's going to be long, but it's because we're going to carefully walk through his life, his death, and the two crazy miracles that led to his canonization. I wanted to challenge you guys to stay with me through this one to the end, because only then will you really see the full picture of why St. Carlo Acutis he's not just important for us, important for Catholics. He may be one of the most important saints for our generation. And I'm not joking, but you need to hear his story. And at the end of the video also, I'm going to share some more about what kind of impact this has had on me as a former evangelical. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. And this is just going to be basically like a story of his life. Okay, I think you're really going to find a lot of value in this, but everything that I'm telling you guys can be verified online. This is all public information. Okay, so if you feel like I'm not saying something accurately, just go check it out. So Carlo Acutis, he was born in London in 1991, but his family soon moved back to Milan. Okay, now here's the wild part of this. Okay, his parents were wealthy. They were educated, and let's just say culturally Catholic at best. Okay, his mom even admitted that she'd barely stepped foot into a church outside of the occasional wedding or a sacrament. But then comes along this little boy. And from his earliest years, he starts pulling his entire family back to faith. Imagine being like a toddler who drags your parents to Mass, because that's essentially what happened in this case. By age 3, Carlo was insisting on stopping at churches to bring flowers to the Virgin Mary and to pray in front of the crucifix. And at 4, while most kids are still just learning how to read, Carlo was already praying the rosary every single day. This wasn't a kid parroting his parents' faith. This was a kid leading his parents into faith. His mother later said herself that she was saved by Carlo's example. When he made his first communion at the age of 7, it wasn't just a milestone. It was actually the axis of his life. Carlo would beg to attend daily Mass. He would kneel for Eucharistic adoration and tell anyone who asked that the Eucharist is my highway to heaven. And he was so serious that he even coined a little motto for himself that said, Holy Mass, Holy Me. But Carlos's holiness wasn't locked away in a church. Okay, he was the kind of boy who would share his pocket money with the poor. He would befriend the classmate that everyone else bullied and quietly buy blankets for homeless people on the streets of Milan. Teachers actually only realized the extent of his hidden charity at his funeral. When the church was filled with poor people, he had actually secretly helped. And at the same time of all of this holiness, he was also just normal. Like, he loved soccer, Pokemon, video games, and The Simpsons. The difference, though, is that he kept everything in balance. Okay, he limited himself to 1 hour of gaming a week because, as he put it, what's the use of winning 1,000 battles if you can't win against your own passions? That's wisdom that, like, I need to take seriously. Most of us never reach that level of wisdom. And then there's his tech side. Like, Carlo wasn't just into computers, he was a prodigy. In his teens, he was building websites, he was coding, and eventually created a massive online catalog of Eucharistic miracles. I'm currently looking into those now, that still use around the world today. While other kids were obsessing over MySpace, Carlo was using the internet to point people to Jesus. In the fall of 2006, everything seemed normal for Carlo. He was 15, he was in high school, still coding websites and playing soccer with friends, but then out of nowhere, his health collapsed. He started to feel these sort of flu-like symptoms. They rushed him to the hospital. Doctors discovered an aggressive form of leukemia. Imagine being that young, 15, and then hearing that kind of diagnosis. Most people would be in despair, right? Asking like, why is this happening to me? I'm so young. Or they would cling desperately onto any sort of comfort. Carlo responded differently. He saw it as his final offering to God. From his hospital bed, and just get this, okay? He calmly told his family and his doctors, I offer all of the suffering I will have to undergo for the Lord, the Pope, and the church. Now, when I first read these words, I'll be honest with you guys, I was literally almost driven to tears, okay? Having that kind of capacity to embrace your suffering in such a selfless way is remarkable. It's something that I try to aspire to, but it doesn't just show maturity, right? It shows sainthood. This is what saints do. And honestly, it's what I aspire to when faced with trials in my own life. Often I don't reach them, but that's why it's so beautiful and why it nearly drove me to tears. Like, this is what it's all about. He refused painkillers, explaining that he would offer his suffering for those who were worse off than him. Nurses tried to wake his parents at one point, but Carlo actually stopped them. He didn't want his mom and dad to lose sleep on his account. Even in his last hours, his mind was on other people and not on himself. When his mother was weeping at his bedside, he gently consoled her. He said, Mom, don't be afraid. Because of Jesus, death is not the end. It's a passage to true life. Be happy because I am happy. On October 12th, 2006, just 10 days after being admitted to the hospital, and at just 15 years old, Carlo passed away with a sort of serene smile on his face. He died as he had lived, at peace with his eyes fixed on Christ. But his story almost begins here. Okay, at his funeral, people began whispering about favors and healings connected to him. One woman with breast cancer prayed for his intercession during the funeral mass and was inexplicably cured without the chemotherapy doctors had prescribed. A friend of the family, a 44-year-old woman who had never been able to conceive, prayed at his funeral also. Just a month later, she discovered that she was pregnant. Even Carlo's own mother experienced something extraordinary. Years before, she had longed for more children, but was unable to conceive. Now, after Carlo's death, she had a dream of him. And in the dream, he told her that she would become a mother again. And then 4 years later, after Carlo passed, she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. She had no doubt that her son in heaven had a hand in this. And guys, this is all true stuff. You can go look this up for yourself. Now, these events weren't part of the official canonization process. We're going to turn to that quickly. But for his family and friends, these were very powerful signs. Okay, and to them, it was very obvious. Like, Carlo was already interceding, already close to God. In the end, Carlo's death wasn't a tragedy, as you might expect for a boy, 15 years old, dying young of leukemia. His death was actually a triumph. He showed the world how to die well, not in fear, but in faith, not in bitterness, but in love. His life was short, yes, but it continues to bear fruit through the miracles, conversions, and countless young people who now look to him as a model of modern holiness. Some people might have thought that Carlo's death was the end of his story, but in reality, like I say, it was just the beginning. Like, his holiness didn't fade away after his passing. It seemed to intensify. Actually, the prayers, the stories, the quiet healings, all of it was building towards something greater. And in 2013, one extraordinary event in Brazil would become the official miracle that opened the door to his beatification. Before diving into that miracle, though, let's zoom out for a second. The Catholic Church doesn't just take sainthood lightly, okay? It's not about sentiment or popularity. To be beatified, a candidate needs a verified miracle attributed to their intercession. And verified, what I mean by verified, it doesn't mean like a good story floating around on the internet. It means official medical records, sworn testimonies, tribunal investigations, and layers upon layers of scrutiny by doctors, scientists, theologians, cardinals, and finally, the Pope himself. I've actually spoken about this with Monsignor Robert Sarno, who spent decades working in the Vatican office that investigates miracles. He described the process as one of the most rigorous in the world. So rigorous, in fact, that many cases fall apart under examination. The goal is not to prove a miracle happened, but to try basically every possible way of showing that it didn't happen. And only after that, if no natural explanation can be given, then and only then does the church actually move forward. That's the sort of the level of evidence that we're talking about here. The beautiful thing about this is that everything I'm going to reveal to you guys can be independently verified online. With that in mind, let's return to Brazil. In 2013, a little boy named Matthias Lenz Vienna had been suffering since birth from a rare and devastating condition, annular pancreas. Basically, a ring of pancreatic tissue had wrapped around the first part of the small intestine, sort of strangling it. And that caused like constant vomiting and malnutrition and pain so severe that doctors said only surgery could fix it. And to be clear, medical consensus is pretty firm on this. Okay, annular pancreas, the condition that this boy had, doesn't just sort of self-correct. Without surgical intervention, it does not resolve. And I want to pause here for a moment because as a dad with 3 kids, I've got 3 young kids, and I've also got a nephew who struggled with serious digestive issues for years. This story, when I was reading through it as part of my research, like it really hit me pretty hard. Stomach pain in children is agonizing. It's agonizing, not just for the child, but for the parents too. Meal times turn into battlegrounds or just, riddled with anxiety. Nights are sleepless. Parents carry a crushing sense of helplessness in these situations. And Matthias's case was heartbreaking. Okay, by the age of 2, he weighed only 20 pounds and had been hospitalized repeatedly, even developing pneumonia from chronic aspiration. And his family was absolutely desperate. They couldn't afford the risky surgery and they had run out of options. Then came October 12th, 2013, which was the anniversary of Carlo Acutis' death. At a small chapel in Campo Grande, Brazil, parishioners were finishing a novena to Carlo. During Mass that day, a relic of Carlo, a piece of his clothing, was displayed for veneration. Matthias' grandfather encouraged the little boy to approach the relic, and in childlike simplicity, Matthias placed his hand on Carlo's relic and prayed, "Stop vomiting." Gosh. So hard. Witnesses recall what happened next. That very night, for the first time in his short life, Matthias asked for a full meal. He sat down with his siblings, ate a bowl of rice and bean broth, and kept it all down. No vomiting, no pain, just a normal dinner with his family. And from that day forward, the relentless vomiting ceased. His appetite returned. Doctors soon confirmed that what the family already knew in their hearts, that the pancreatic obstruction was completely gone. Imaging showed that the malformed pancreas had somehow regenerated in the correct way. Somehow. To this day, Matthias is healthy, living a normal life. And remember, there is no medical explanation for this. Annular pancreas doesn't just disappear without surgery, let alone overnight after a child prays while touching a relic. The church took this case very seriously. The Archdiocese of Campo Grande gathered every medical record, every doctor's report, every family testimony, and then they sent it to Rome. A diocesan tribunal formally investigated the case, interviewing everyone under oath. In 2019, the Vatican validated the inquiry as legally sound. Then a panel of 5 medical experts reviewed the evidence. They unanimously declared the cure rapid, complete, and lasting without scientific explanation. After that, a commission of theologians unanimously agreed it was a result of Carlo's intercession. Then the cardinals and the bishops for the Congregation of the Saints, Causes of Saints, weighed in, affirming the judgment. Finally, in February 2020, Pope Francis signed the decree recognizing the miracle. A boy with a condition that can only be treated with surgery touches Carlo's relic, prays in the simplest words, most gentle and innocent words imaginable, and that very night eats a meal like his siblings, just like his siblings for the first time in his life. The pancreas, according to the medical imaging, regenerated in the correct way. Every step of this process is documented, every claim scrutinized, every record made public. This isn't hearsay. This is evidence. Anyone can go look this up for yourself. And in October 2020, thanks to that miracle, Carlo Acutis was officially beatified in Assisi, the first millennial ever to reach that stage on the road to sainthood. The first miracle in Brazil was absolutely extraordinary, but the story of Carlo's sainthood is not finished yet. Okay, beatification requires one miracle, canonization requires another one. So in 2022, 16 years after his death, the second miracle would come, not in South America this time, but in Europe, in the life of a young woman studying abroad in Italy. Her name was Valeria, I hope I'm saying this right, Valeria Valverde. a 21-year-old from Costa Rica. She was living in Florence at the time, studying abroad, when everything changed. On the night of July 2nd, 2022, Valeria was riding her bicycle when she crashed hard onto the pavement. The impact left her with massive head trauma, multiple brain lesions, hemorrhaging, and swelling so severe that doctors had to remove part of her skull just to keep her alive. The situation was super bleak. Valeria slipped into a coma. She was hooked up to a ventilator. Her life was literally hanging on by a thread. Doctors told her family what they thought was the truth. The odds of survival here are vanishingly small, and even if she did survive, she would almost certainly be left with permanent brain damage. When Valeria's mother, Liliana, flew in from Costa Rica, she found her daughter unconscious in a hospital bed, all these machines keeping her alive. Liliana was a woman of deep faith, with a special devotion to Blessed Carlo Acutis, already beatified at that point. From the moment of the accident, she began entrusting Valeria to Carlo's intercession, praying fervently and asking others to do the same. For 6 whole days, absolutely nothing changed. Valeria lay in her coma. Her prognosis was still grim. Then, on July 8th, Liliana did something absolutely extraordinary. She left the hospital, traveled to Assisi, where Carlo's body rests in the shrine of the spoliation. She knelt at his tomb for hours, pouring out her heart, begging him to pray for her daughter's healing. She even wrote a letter to Carlo, pleading for his help. And on that very same day, back in Florence, something astonishing happened. Valeria, who had been fully dependent on the ventilator, suddenly began to breathe on her own. The doctors were absolutely stunned. They did not expect this. Encouraged, though, they began to reduce her sedation. By the next morning, July 9, Valeria was awake. She was moving, responding, even trying to speak. What followed was a recovery so rapid that it defied every medical explanation. Within days, her speech improved. On July 18, a CAT scan revealed something no one anticipated. The hemorrhages in her brain had completely disappeared. By August, she was transferred to a rehabilitation center, and by early September, barely 2 months after the accident, Valeria was alive, alert, and fully functional without any neurological deficits. And on September 2nd, she and her mother returned together to Carlo's tomb in Assisi, this time to give thanks. For the doctors, this was absolutely baffling. Like, a patient with those injuries doesn't just suddenly wake up and walk out of the hospital. Yet Valeria, that's exactly what she did. And this wasn't just surviving her injuries, okay? It was total, complete, and a lasting healing. The church investigated, as it always does. The Archdiocese of Florence opened a formal inquiry, interviewing doctors, nurses, family members, and gathering every medical record. The Vatican later reviewed it all, and in late 2023, the medical board declared her recovery scientifically inexplicable. In March 2024, theologians confirmed that the healing was due to prayers made specifically through Carlo's intercession. In May 2024, the cardinals and bishops of the Dicastery for the Causes of Saints agreed, and Pope Francis officially recognized it as a miracle. And so, with 2 miracles now approved, both sudden, complete, and medically inexplicable, Carlo met the final requirement for sainthood. On September 7, 2025, in a ceremony at the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV canonized him alongside Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. Now I just kind of want to reflect on this a little bit. As a convert from evangelicalism, what struck me most as I was reading through St. Carlo's life and death and the miracles that are associated with his intercession and everything, one of the things that struck me the most is how deeply he cared about holiness from an early age. Most kids are worried about video games or trying to fit in, Carlo was already orienting his life toward God. And when I reflect on that from my own perspective, how I sort of measure up, if I'm honest, I still do struggle with prayer. I struggle with discipline. I'm not naturally drawn to hours of devotion and stuff. Part of me wishes I were more like Carlo. That holiness, it seems like holiness came so easy for him. And I wish that was true for me too. But here's what I have to remind myself of, and maybe you do too. Okay, saints are not superhumans. They're not aliens dropped into the history, already perfected, already perfect, already built in with all of these saintly qualities. They're human beings like you and me. They've wrestled with temptation. They've suffered. They've failed. But they ultimately chose to keep saying yes to God. That's what makes their examples so powerful. Holiness is not unattainable. It's not. It's something we're all called to do. And with God's grace, it's something we can actually live. That's beautiful. It's really powerful. As a convert, the community of the saints has been one of the most surprising and honestly beautiful things that I've discovered about the Catholic faith. The saints aren't these like dusty figures in stained glass windows. They're literally part of our existing community, alive in Christ. Their stories inspire us. Yes, like they're very inspiring stuff, but they also actively intercede for us, obviously from a Catholic view. And sometimes even through relics, we experience their presence in tangible ways. This is such a vibrant, living picture of the Christian world. It's so cool. And honestly, I could never go back to evangelicalism after experiencing this reality. The communion of saints makes the church feel so alive in ways that I never could have imagined. So I think that's where I'll leave it for you guys. Saints are awesome. They remind us that sanctification is possible in this life. And St. Carlo Acutis, the first millennial saint, is absolute proof of that. St. Carlo, pray for us. Oh, and by the way, Christianity is true.